Always turn to the source, not to the contents. Taken from Recognition of Me is Liberation by His Divine Presence, Avatar Adidar Samraj. Devotee, by your grace, beloved Lord, my practice of whole bodily devotional turning to you has intensified in response to your darshan. I have noticed in this process of intensification that I become frustrated with the apparent limitation in my feeling of you. When this occurs, I notice that I fall into examining and feeling the self-contraction. I understand that you call us to self-observation in the context of radical devotion to you. However, I have been feeling this as a lapse in my practice of turning to you. My question is whether this sense of practicing self-observation while feeling out of relationship with you when I practice it is merely part of the listening process, or is simply an error in my understanding and practice. Adidar, it is an error in your practice. The activity you are describing is what I have described as self-watching or self-meditation. It is not self-observation. It is self-indulgence. That is why I say to you, you must persist in the practice you are given, which is to turn the faculties to me, thereby being surrendered to me and forgetting the contents, not by making some effort to forget the contents, but by turning to me. In the process of this ego-transcending activity, characteristics and flashes of egoic content will be spontaneously observed. But that does not mean that the practice suddenly changes and you are supposed to turn on these things that are being observed. You are to turn to me. You will not understand yourself by merely watching your own contents and thinking about them, worrying over them, trying to analyze them, trying to get rid of them, trying to fulfill them, trying to do anything about them at all. The practice is the devotional turning to me, always. The practice is not to turn to the contents. Whatever contents there are will arise and pass. They will be noticed without your having to turn to them in and of themselves. And they will be transcended by your persistence in turning to me. Thus, if you make the decision to turn on the contents, whatever they may be, and dwell upon them, and ignore me, and forget about turning to me, then clearly that is an error in practice. It is not fruitful, nor is it right practice. The discipline is to constantly turn to me, regardless of the impulses patterned in the faculties which make you feel like dwelling on yourself or dwelling on your contents. The habit of turning on self is the habit of self-contraction. That is egoity itself. That itself is egoity. Turning on the contents of the faculties is egoity. That is, by its very nature, the self-contraction itself being animated, being indulged in. The ego-transcending practice is to turn to me, regardless of the force of what is arising. Do you understand? Yes, beloved, I feel profoundly instructed by your communication. Thank you. No matter what arises, the practice is not to turn to the contents, but always to turn to me. In other words, always turn to the source, not to the contents. This is always the practice. All of the technical dimensions of the practice of Adidam are essentially built on this logic of practice, of turning to the source, not to the contents, not to the effects, not to the appearances, not to the conditional patterns that otherwise hold the faculties in the subcontracted position. It is always turning to me, not turning on self. If you do this persistently, you will tacitly and most fundamentally understand. Avatar Adidar holds up his open right hand, palm facing out, that there is one activity universal to the faculties, to the total body mind, which is the binding activity. This is the self-contraction. Avatar Adidar closes his fist. To persist in turning to me, Avatar Adidar opens his hand, is to exercise the ego-transcending disposition. Mere persistence in that activity of turning to me, in spite of the impulse to turn upon yourself and your contents, becomes a tacit, profound crisis of self-understanding. That is the secret of the process that becomes true hearing of me. That process is not an intellectual matter. Of course, there are observations that take place outside of the meditation circumstances. You are even called to formally enter into a process of self-observation by, for instance, accounting for the history of certain aspects of your life, or the history of the last month of your practice. Therefore, there is the formal obligation of self-observation. In that sense, that accounting serves the grasping of something about the patterns of life. And that accounting relates to your enactment of the disciplines associated with the practice of Adidam, the functional, practical, relational and cultural disciplines, and serves the disposition that is the core of the practice. But the fundamental practice, which is a moment-to-moment practice, is ego-transcending, not turning the faculties on themselves or on their contents, but turning to me, therefore turning to the source, not the contents, not the apparent effects. Even in the midst of experiences that are generally my transcendental spiritual infusion, the fundamental practice is still to turn to me. You will notice the experience of feeling me in various ways, but the practice is not to dwell on the experiences. The practice is turning to me, to the source. The more experiences you have that are genuinely of a transcendental spiritual nature in communion with me, the more you will turn to me. That is right practice. Those who become involved in endless yakety-yakking about the phenomena they experience, always talking about the story of their spiritual experience, last week or 10 years ago, whatever, are just exercising themselves in self-contraction. In every apparent moment, the practice is to turn to me. Otherwise, your activity will be self-contraction, automatically. Self-contraction is nothing but self-watching, or meditating on your own contents and patterns. That leads nowhere but to further bondage. It reinforces egoity. The practice is always ego-transcending. Always. Avatar Adidar holds up his open right hand again. Thus, even in the midst of apparent spiritual phenomena, you still turn to me. Turn the faculties to me, to the source, not sitting there watching the movies, the conditional play on the faculties themselves. True transcendental spiritual infusion by me is ultimately beyond and prior to content. You may like to make much of what you might call spiritual phenomena, which are really, the most part, psychic and psychological phenomena, or brain phenomena. However, what is spiritual in nature transcends conditions. True transcendental spiritual confusion by me, or transcendental spiritual communion with me, is self-forgetting. In that case, you do not involve yourself in merely watching phenomena that you may call spiritual, nor do you make such secondary aspects of experience into presumed to be primary aspects of experience. Instead of that, the practice of Adidam is about turning to me. Thus, transcendental spiritual communion with me is a pure realization, free of egoity, free of conditional contents, and ultimately this practice becomes perfect. The perfect practice is a practice beyond all contents, prior to all contents, prior to the position of the body-mind complex itself. But you are not doing that now because you are adapted to self-contraction and addicted to the contents of the self-contracted faculties of experience. Indeed, when devotees speak to me in occasions such as this, they characteristically speak from the position of the body-mind complex. I am on the other side of the water. I must remind you of this when you ask me questions. You are assuming the position of self-contraction. You are asking questions, not only from the position of self-contraction, but as self-contraction. You are the question you ask, because you are assuming the self-contracted position or orientation of the faculties in order to ask the question. And the question, when asked, is a reflection of the contents associated with the self-contracted faculties and the patterning of the self-contracted faculties. Therefore, this closed fist is asking me about this open hand. And so I tell you that the practice is not persisting in this closed fist, but always exercising yourself in an ego-transcending manner, like this open hand. I am using the gestures of the closed fist and the open hand to refer to two entirely different modes of disposition. The turned to me disposition, which ultimately becomes the perfect practice of Adidam, is an ego-transcending activity in which the faculties are moved from the position of being turned on themselves and all their psychophysical contents, whatever the contents may be in any moment, and are turned to me instead. The practice of devotion to me is self-forgetting by its very nature. It is not an effort to forget. It is a turning to me. It is always that. That is always a practice, from the contents to me, from effects to the source. This is devotion. This becomes transcendental spiritual communion with me. This becomes true hearing of me. This becomes the real seeing of me. This becomes the thumbs. This becomes the transcendental spiritual establishment of the true witness consciousness. This becomes the perfect practice of Adidam. This becomes the only by me revealed and given seventh stage awakening. This becomes divine translation. But you must outgrow the habit of narcissus, closed fist. All the means I have given you, all the means in which I have instructed you, are forms of this ego-transcending discipline. You must outgrow it. You cannot merely listen to what I am saying and now it is gone. It is not gone. You are doing it right now. You become more and more sensitized to the fact that you are doing it constantly, over and over again, and then suddenly you understand that you are doing this. This is it. Avatar Adidar begins to rapidly open and shut his fist. This is what you are doing, all the time. Based on that most fundamental self-understanding, there is the capability to move beyond the activity of self-contraction in every moment. It is a capability that makes practice more readily and effectively ego-transcending, more consistently ego-transcending. Therefore, the reality way of Adidam is not about any kind of idealizing of potential development or evolutionary experience. The reality way of Adidam is not about any kind of experience at all. The reality way of Adidam is not about conditioned existence. The reality of Adidam is not about the potential of the body-mind complex. The reality way of Adidam is about the realization of that which is always already the case. That which is always already the case is the case. It never ceases to be the case. When someone asks me a question, he or she characteristically does not speak from the disposition that is established in reality, in the condition. That is always already the case. Rather, you come to me and speak from the presumed to be separate position of the body-mind complex and its experiences, problems and activities which you reflect to me in your questions or your descriptions of your experience. Sometimes I even make fun of your experience, or I talked to you very seriously about it, as if it is a very serious matter. It is serious only in the sense that it is tying you up in knots. Thus, you are always deluded by your own energies, by your own self-contraction, by your own habit, by your own faculties, by your own reflection on yourselves. I was just asked a question by a devotee. What is she talking about? Narcissus. She is sitting in meditation, turning to me, and all of a sudden, she starts looking at herself, looking at her contents, or whatever is arising at the moment. That is Narcissus. That is what that is. Understanding this moment to moment, such that it is tacitly obvious, without having to figure it out, is true hearing of me. True hearing of me covers all the possibilities of experience, not just some particular dimension of experience. Therefore, true hearing of me covers all conditioned experiences, all of the experiences potential in any and all of the 6 developmental stages of life. Every kind of experiential event that is potential for human beings within the context of the complete human anatomy, gross, subtle, causal, is a sign of self-contraction. All conditioned experience is ego-bound, ego-made, and conditionally limited, dependent upon conditioned activity, conditional arising, for more gesture. All of that must be transcended as the basis for the by me given divine avataric grace, perfect fulfillment of the perfect practice. The seventh stage demonstration is non-egoic and is not dependent on any conditional apparatus whatsoever. Thus, you rather naively live and speak to me from the position of the self-contraction. By habit, by adaptation, by false presumption, you are identified with the body-mind self, the ego as a manifestation of conditional forms. Egoity is not only the self-contraction of the faculties, it encompasses all of the contents and patterns to which the contracted faculties are subject and with which they are bound up and constantly combined right now. As soon as you get up in the morning, you are you, and you remain you until the end of the day when you go asleep. It is non-stop. You spend the entire day in the waking state, effectively kneeling by the pond, looking at yourself, and it does not make any difference who or what you are apparently perceiving. You're always looking at yourself. You're always turned upon your separate self. You're always wrapped up in the self-contraction of the faculties, and you have a long history, a lifetime history of indefinable history, an unlimited history of living the life of Narcissus, of self-contraction, self-contracted patterning, and obsession with self-contracted contents. Thus, even when you experience me transcendently spiritually, by tendency you turn on yourself. Whatever you experience becomes your experience, and suddenly you are very important. But in reality, you have nothing to do with it. Even the experience itself, the vision, the whatever, is not the it of it. I am. If you are truly experiencing me transcendently spiritually, you do not turn on the conditions that arise, even though they are experiences of me that are registering within the faculties. Rather, because experiences are arising and you know it is me, you turn to me. If you do not, then of course, you become deluded in one of the 6 kinds of egoity, corresponding to the 6 developmental stages of life. Thus, you are always, in effect, being deluded by your own activity of self-contraction, and you must constantly oblige yourself to turn to me in this ego-transcending manner. Devotion to me is not about turning to some idea, some abstract concept. Where would that idea or concept be? In the knot of self-contraction. To practice devotion to me is to always turn to me recognized, me as the source. If you think I am just an organism sitting here, well, there may still be some kinds of benefits of concentration and relaxation from looking at me, but the process and practice of the reality way of Adidam is not going to develop significantly on that basis. The reality way of Adidam develops significantly only in your devotional recognition of me, your spontaneous devotionally responsive turning to me, your real sensitivity to me, your knowing of me through direct experience. Thus, in the course of the maturing practice of Adidam, you are ever more profoundly infused by my blessing, such as shown as my person, until your devotion to me, your knowing of me is perfect, and the perfect practice of Adidam becomes possible and true. Until then, the perfect practice of Adidam is neither possible nor true, regardless of what you think when you ask yourself about it. If you ask yourself a question and you answer back, you are still there. This, closed fist, is what you are doing, self-contraction or self-reflection. The knot of the faculties is Narcissus, bending over the pool. When the faculties turn on their own contents, on experience, that is Narcissus, bent over the pond, looking in the reflecting pond of the non-conditional reality. It is to be in the wrong position, seeing reality in the form of illusions, rather than realizing reality itself. Existence is whatever you realize it to be. It has every potential to be found to be as self-contraction finds it. But it also has every potential to be as it is realized to be when there is no self-contraction. It is up to you how serious you will become in terms of the potential of true practice. That true practice perpetually turns to me and ultimately recognizes me, realizes me. That true practice is all about becoming loosened from bondage. Avatar Adida opens and shuts his fist to the method of egoity and the mentality that justifies it. Nda.